A special thank you to Kathy Teets. She's the president of Headline Books, and she's very hardworking. Like I said, I don't know if you heard it earlier, but she won Independent Publisher of the Year a few years ago. So she's an amazing person and a wonderful friend, and I thank you, Kathy. I'm very excited to share Dori's gift with you today. Now, this is the first story that I had published, and it's been a few years back now. This was published in 2014. Most of what I do now is with another character that I write about, which is Gracie. This is the latest Gracie's Guide. And so I rarely get to share anything about Dori, so I'm very excited to share this. Dori is a very personal story to me. Dori was actually my great-grandmother. Now, the story is not a true story, but it could have been. It could have very easily happened in the family because it's a musical story and about musical heritage, and they were all about music in this side of the family. Well, actually, both sides of my family. So, the story behind this story, I always get asked, how did you come up with this? A few years back, I was watching a documentary on Appalachia, and it was talking about poverty, generational poverty in Appalachia. And to say that no one smiled during this interview of an hour would be an understatement. I mean, it was the most depressing hour, one of the most depressing hours I think I've ever watched on TV. And at the end of that, I just thought it was so depressing to people that are not from the area. When they would have listened to that, they not only wouldn't have want to come move into the area, they wouldn't even want to visit. They probably wouldn't even want to drive through. It was really bad. It was really sad and depressing. So I began to think about my heritage and, stories that I heard my grandparents tell me when I was little. And I had a great-grandfather that was a sharecropper. And the way it worked for him, he did all the labor on someone else's farm who was the landowner. And at the end, at harvest time, my great-grandfather would get a small little portion of the harvest. And that's what he raised his family on. He raised his family in a little two-room cabin on someone else's land. So my grandma, it was her dad, she endured hardship and poverty as a child. But yet when she would tell stories about her childhood, her face would glow when she would talk about her parents and when she would talk about the love and the good times that they had growing up. And the only way we ever knew about hardship is when we would dig in and ask questions about it. So I thought, we need to get some stories out that share that love. I never met that great-grandfather, but yet I still can feel the love that transcends generations. The Bible says love never ends, and I can still feel that love. And so that's what I wanted to share. So Dori's gift, it's not a grand adventure Dori goes on in this story. It's not like a page turner that you're trying to find out what happens. It's just a glimpse into a day in a little girl's life over a century ago. And it talks about happy times, happy family times in the mountains. So I'm going to read through the story, and I'm going to share a little bit as I go. And I want to say a quick hi. Kathy says that Laura is on and Cheryl Whitley. So hey guys, it's good to see you. But I hope you enjoy Dori's gift. Breakfast is ready, yelled a voice outside the bedroom door. Dori opened her eyes and realized her sisters and roommates, Ruth and Becky, were gone. She took this rare opportunity to stretch her arms and legs as far as she could reach across the bed. She loved the way the quilts felt heavy on her body. She loved the smell of coffee and bacon mingled together. She loved mornings. How many of you kids love mornings? Yeah. Dori wondered briefly why she was allowed to miss the morning chores, for she knew she wasn't sick. Then she remembered it was her birthday. She turned 7 today. She closed her eyes and wondered if she would receive a gift. Mama always made their birthdays special, but the last 2 years, the summers have been dry and the crops were low, so the children had not received a gift. But birthdays were still good days at her house because Mama always baked a cake and made their favorite meal on her special day. Dori opened her eyes and looked around the room. There were so many things she was thankful for. Her clothes, her doll, the books on the shelf. She felt bad for wanting more because she and her siblings were blessed with more than many of her friends. She closed her eyes again and prayed a prayer of thankfulness for all of her blessings, and then she jumped out of bed. Dori's warm feet hit the cold wooden floor, and she ran downstairs as fast as she could to Mama's warm stove. The warmth of the fire quickly eased the chill of the brisk November morning. She stretched her fingers out and cautiously held them as close to the stove as she could get. The stove was piping hot, and although it was her favorite place to be on cold mornings, she had felt the consequences of getting too close. As she stood there, lost in the warmth of the fire, she didn't hear her brother Cecil sneaking up from behind with a fingerful of butter for the birthday girl's nose. Laughter quickly filled the house at the sight of Dori's greasy face. Dori promptly cleaned her face, ate breakfast, combed her hair, and got dressed. Today was Monday, wash day, the hardest working day for Dori and her sisters. Her 3 older brothers headed out to school, but the girls did not go to school on wash day because there was so much work to be done at home. She heard Papa outside working on the fire in the wash house and getting the kettle ready, so she quickly bounded down the stairs and raced Ruth and Becky to the spring house. Ruth, the youngest, always got the smallest bucket, but it was a battle between Dori and Becky for the medium-sized bucket. Once again, Becky came in first, and Dori was stuck toting the large bucket. The girls worked all morning, filling and refilling the kettle and wash tub with rainwater from the barrel on the porch, and making sure there was plenty of homemade lye soap in the tub as well. The clothes were transported from the kettle to the tub to be scrubbed on a washboard, then back to the kettle and stirred with a stick to rinse. The white clothes were boiled and hung on the clothesline, while the towels and work clothes were thrown across the fence. Mama did the scrubbing, but the girls helped with the rest of the tasks. Dori loved to listen to Mama as she sang while she worked. The tunes varied from lively folk songs to hymns. Some of her favorites were Soldier's Boy, Little Maggie, and Unclouded Day. Dori's fingers ached from the cold air contrasting with the steaming hot clothes, but by mid-afternoon, the washing was over. The girls had worked feverishly all day, but Dori and her sisters had a little time to play before supper. Without delay, they transformed the outhouse to a cute little playhouse. They spread a quilt and added pillows and dolls. There were times they hosted fancy tea parties in their playhouse. Dori knew Mama would take time out of her busy day to share at least one cup of tea. It was getting close to supper time, and Dori was getting excited. She knew Mama would fix her favorite meal on her birthday. Her mouth watered as she thought of fried tenderloin, potatoes fried with onions, and hot cornbread. Soon, Mama rang the old cowbell that hung by the kitchen door, which notified the family that it was time to eat. "Do you think you'll get a gift today?" Ruth asked Dori as they were washing their hands in the wash tub. I don't know. I've been thinking about it all day, Dori said. What do you think you'll get? Maybe a doll or a new dress? I hope it's not a pair of high-heeled shoes, Ruth teased. The girls laughed at the thought of Becky, who once received a pair of high-heeled shoes. Becky loved the shoes and insisted on wearing them to Sunday school, even though the family walked 2 miles to church. Her feet ached for days after that grueling walk. After supper was over, Papa rose from the table and told Dori to close her eyes. Ruth closed her eyes too, because she was just as eager. Papa placed a medium-sized wooden box in front of her. Excitement filled the air as she opened her eyes and saw the gift. She gently ran her hand over the lid of the box. The box had musical notes on it and her name carved in the center. She knew Papa had made this gift in his workshop. Was this why he had been spending so much time in the shop lately? She felt this was a special gift, and she savored every moment of this special occasion. When she could stand it no longer, she delicately unhooked the latch and opened the box. Resting inside was the most magnificent dulcimer Dori had ever seen. It was made of dark, stained wood that glistened with a glossy coat. There were 2 roses engraved on it, and 4 strings wound around the neck. She closed her eyes, and she held the dulcimer as close to her. She whispered a prayer of thanks. This was the greatest gift she had ever seen. She sat frozen in her chair, afraid to move, for fear of waking up and discovering this was only a dream. Her fears vanished as she gently touched each string. Her small hand fit around the neck as she lifted the gift close to her. The quiet hush of the moment was broken as Dori strummed the chord. The family cheered at this joyful sound, and each of her many siblings started requesting songs for her to play. She already knew how to play 3 chords, which enabled her to play many simple tunes. She had watched her older brothers, Cecil and Buddy, play many times, and they had patiently taken the time to teach her a few chords. It was because of this interest that Papa decided to make this gift. They were a musical family, and they tried to nurture the talent of each child. Papa smiled as he looked at Dori, for he knew part of the gift could not be held in her hands. The love of music had been silently given to her as it had been given to him and to his parents by God, a musical heritage that extends to each generation. Once again, Dori sat in front of the stove, except this time she was not warming her hands, but the hearts of her family as she played her dulcimer, and they all sang together in harmony. And this is what they sang. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. And this is the dulcimer that I was playing. This was the happiest day of Dori's childhood and her most memorable birthday. She would continue to play and sing for her family for many, many years. Her beautiful voice would echo through their tiny country church, blessing many people at Sunday services, weddings, and special occasions. Dori's gift would fill the hills, hollows, and hearts of her people for many, many years. And hello to Alicia and to Natasha. And thank you, Natasha. We see she's already placed an order. Today we're doing a very special thing. When you order Dori's gift, you can also receive Dori's coloring book, which is a 32-page coloring book and activity book. So there's a lot of things in there. And the first 3 to order will receive, you can see that, a little dulcimer puzzle. And this was handmade right here in West Virginia. So it's kind of a glare on it. You can see it. But anyway, it's a little wooden puzzle that's shaped like a dulcimer. So I want to share with you, if I can get this up and going, a PowerPoint. Is that coming up? Can you let me know, is that coming up? Can you see the PowerPoint there? Okay, well, I'm going to keep rolling because I can't see any comments right now. But this is about Appalachia. I have Stephanie here with me, if she can let me know real quick, because this will be pointless if no one can see.
If you need to share your screen, please.
Okay. Let me see how to do that. Okay, now can you see it?
Yes, terrific.
Good deal. All right. I want to just give you a little history on Appalachia and talk a little bit about the story as well and some special things, what made this story so special to me. But this is the Appalachian region. As you can tell, that is the eastern part of the United States, and the Appalachian region is circled. And when the early settlers came in, the European settlers, when they came over, you know, the towns near the ocean, they started filling up, and so people wanted to go and get their own land. And so they started moving west. And for many of them, when they got to the mountains, especially the ones from Scotland and Ireland, it seemed more like home to them, and they chose to stay there. But for some of them, they weren't able to go any further because the mountains were so rugged and it was so hard to travel because, of course, there were no roads. But the barriers that were formed, if you can see the beautiful mountains there were some parts where they were so remote and the mountains kind of formed a barrier around them to where when other things, the world was changing around them, a lot of things stayed the same in the mountains. So the people from Ireland, Scotland, England, and Germany, a lot of the traditions, the songs, home remedies, crafts, and things like that were unique to them stayed in the hills, and they were not changed by the world changing around them. So the Appalachian region, there's a little farm there. And on the farm, you can see there's a little bit of flat land in front, and then it's nothing but hills. So a lot of the region, they had to farm this rugged terrain and produce crops, and it was very difficult for them. There wasn't much that came easy. I mean, look at those ladies healing on, you know, working on that hill, hoeing on the side of a mountain there. So the things that they had, their possessions, were very cherished because they didn't have a lot. Now, another thing that I used in the book is quilts that were special to me. And this first quilt that I have right here is the first quilt that was used in the story. And I sent pictures of my family and pictures of quilts that I wanted to be used to the lady to the illustrator, and she was the one who put it all into the book. So this quilt was made by my grandmother, This is called a patchwork quilt. And if you look in the story, it's the first quilt that we see. It's the quilt that was on Dori's bed. So some interesting things about quilts in that day was that a lot of the things like the Scots-Irish quilters, people who study quilts, they have found a lot of things that are unique that were hidden in the hills for generations, the way they quilted. If you look down at the bottom of the slide, it looks like a little rainbow. That's what the quilts, some of them look like on the back. And that was a direct line. They could find a direct line to Scotland and Ireland in the way that they quilted, which is pretty neat, I thought. This is another quilt that I use, the quilt on the right that my grandmother made me. That's a beautiful, beautiful quilt, and I'm pretty sure that pattern is called Around the World. And then that is where Ashley used it. Ashley, the illustrator, used it in the book. And I thought that was beautiful, the way she put it over the line there. Now, this was another quilt made by my grandmother. And what's really special about my grandmother's quilts, when I look at this quilt that she made me, my grandmother, she made her clothes. Now, she would buy church clothes, you know, good dresses for church, but her everyday clothes, she always made them herself. So when I look at this quilt, I can see pieces of fabric that my grandma used to have a dress just like that, you know, and there's several pieces of fabric in here that even though, and that one as well, even though my grandma has been gone for years, I still remember her wearing this dress, her wearing a dress made out of this material. So they would use, after they would make their clothes, they would use the leftover material to make the quilts. So the quilts were known as kind of a snapshot of their life at the time. And they also didn't waste anything. The quilt that I have up on this slide is called a crazy quilt. That's the pattern. So whenever they had leftovers, scraps, not enough to make a big quilt, making it into something, you know, really pretty, they would just sew them all together and make a little quilt. And that was called a crazy quilt. And that was used at the tea party in the story. Okay, buttering a person's nose. That is an old Appalachian tradition. The origin is unknown. I wasn't able to find one as I've researched it. Some people believe that it was grease for good luck. The greased nose made the child too slippery for bad luck to catch them. And the tradition is thought to be of Scottish descent. And what's interesting, this is mostly in the southern Appalachia that I find people have had their nose buttered. Now sometimes we use cake icing and put it on someone's nose. But I was watching a show a couple months back, and this was from Canada, and it was a show that someone had their nose buttered. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Okay, washing clothes. It was really, they called Monday wash day because it took all day to wash clothes. And if you look at the picture of the two little ladies outside, one of them is standing over a hot fire, and she has clothes in the kettle, and she's stirring them around with a paddle, with a stick. And then the other lady is scrubbing the clothes on a washboard. Now, a washboard, they would take their soap and they would rub it into the clothes, and then they would scrub it on this washboard to get all the dirt out. Clothes probably are nowhere near as clean now as they used to be, let me tell you that. But when you think about it, you know, in the summer, they still had to build that fire and stand over that hot fire. And in the winter, the fire might have felt good, but when she was over there scrubbing those clothes, imagine how cold her hands would have become. So it was really a struggle to live back in that day, because in the day when Dori was a little girl, there was no electricity. You know, we feel that we're isolated now. We can't get out during this time of isolation and when we're all shut in and quarantined. But we're shut in and quarantined with electricity, And with internet, you know, we still have contact with the world, which back in that day, they were truly isolated, except when they would go and visit family. Okay, and there's the dulcimer. The dulcimer can be traced back to the Bible. In fact, some people say in many regions, the mountain people would only use instruments that are in the Bible. And I know the Bible, or the dulcimer, is mentioned in the book of Daniel in the Bible, which explains why the dulcimer was so widely accepted. It was also very inexpensive to make, and it became popular for that reason as well. And I've seen, as I've researched online, I've seen some pictures of some pretty rough looking dulcimers that were made back in the day. Another thing that makes Dori's gift so special, I wrote it for my mom. I dedicated it to my mom. And I wanted to use pictures of mom when she was a little girl. So I sent all these pictures, family pictures, to Ashley, who was the illustrator, and she took that picture of my mom, and that's what she based Dori on. And I think she did an amazing job. Okay, and when I would do this, now this doesn't always work the same for every book, but for this particular book, Ashley and I, we worked together very closely. We went through the book and decided what each picture would look like. And then she would send me a sketch. So that's a penciled in sketch on the left. And then, you know, to see if it was okay. You know, was there any changes? Does everything look okay? And then if it was okay, she would paint it in. These are actually watercolored pictures that she did. Amazing, beautiful watercolored pictures. This picture is the real Dori's kitchen. And this was taken sometime in the 1950s, I think. And if you see her cook stove in the back, and in order for them to cook any meal, they would have to light a fire in their cook stove and keep that fire hot the entire time. In the winter, that would probably be the favorite room to be in, where mom's, you know, warm stove was, that's where Dori ran down and she warmed her hands by the stove. But think of it in the summer when it was 90 degrees and they still had to go and build a fire. And there was no air conditioning. So life was pretty different back in that day. This is a picture of the spring house as it is today. This picture was taken a few years back. And the spring house was, they had a little spring, a natural spring where they got water as well. And this was kind of like a little cellar. And it was built into the side of the mountain. And it kept things cool. Now, it wasn't as cool as a refrigerator keeps it today, but it did keep things cooler than just setting them out in their kitchen somewhere. And this is the real Thompson family. Where I said that this story could have happened, that they were a musical family. I mean, look at that family picture. I think there's a couple neighbors that's in that picture as well, but most of them are Thompsons. And the guy front and center is my grandpa, Cecil Thompson, and he has his banjo. Anybody who knew him knew he loved that banjo. He played it, I think, every day. And all of his siblings, and that's his dad standing behind him, they had, if you see in this picture, there's a fiddle, there's a few banjos, guitars, a mandolin. I mean, that's a bluegrass band right there. And whenever we had our family reunions, it was truly bluegrass music and gospel bluegrass all day long. So they were a musical family. So I hope you enjoyed Dori's story. There's the order and information, author.angiewilson.com. Let me see if I can get off of this page. Okay, I see a couple more people are on here. Dawson and Kaylee, hello guys. Thank you for those compliments. And Kathy says to read the book again. So for those that just tuned in, I am going to read through Dori's gift again, and we'll look at some of the pictures that I talked about in the slides, and we'll find those pictures in the book. "Breakfast is ready," yelled a voice outside the bedroom door. Dori opened her eyes and realized her sisters and roommates, Ruth and Becky, were gone. She took this rare opportunity to stretch her arms and legs as far as she could reach across the bed. She loved the way the quilts felt heavy on her body. She loved the smell of coffee and bacon mingled together. She loved mornings. Dori wondered briefly why she was allowed to miss the morning chores, because she knew she wasn't sick. Then she remembered it was her birthday. She turned 7 today. You can also see her little doll she has hugged up there. She closed her eyes and wondered if she would receive a gift. Mama always made her birthday special, but the last 2 years had been dry summers and the crops were low, so the children had not received a gift. Birthdays were still good days, because Mama always baked a cake and made their favorite meal on her special day. Dori opened her eyes and she looked around the room. There were many things she was thankful for. Her clothes, her dolls, the books on the shelf. She felt bad for wanting more because she and her siblings were blessed with more than many of her friends. She closed her eyes again and said a prayer of thankfulness for all of her blessings and jumped out of bed. Dori's warm feet hit the cold wooden floor, and she ran downstairs as fast as she could to Mama's warm stove. The warmth of the fire quickly eased the chill of the brisk November morning. She stretched her fingers out and cautiously held them as close as she could get to the stove. The stove was piping hot, and although it was her favorite place to be on cold mornings, she had felt the consequences of getting too close. As she stood there, lost in the warmth of the fire, she didn't hear her brother Cecil sneaking up behind her with a finger full of butter for the birthday girl's nose. Laughter quickly filled the house at the sight of Dori's greasy face. Dori promptly cleaned her face, ate breakfast, combed her hair, and got dressed. Today was Monday, wash day, the hardest working day for Dori and her sisters. Her older brothers had already gone to school, but the girls did not get to go to school on wash day because there was too much work to be done at home. She heard Papa outside working on the fire in the wash house and getting the kettle ready, so she quickly bounded down the stairs and raced Ruth and Becky to the spring house. Ruth, the youngest, always got the smallest bucket, but it was a battle between Dori and Becky for the medium-sized bucket. Once again, Becky came in first, and Dori was stuck toting the larger one. The girls worked all morning, filling and refilling the kettle and wash tub with rainwater from the barrel on the porch, and making sure there was plenty of homemade lye soap in the tubs as well. The clothes were ported from the kettle to the tub to be scrubbed on a washboard and back to the kettle to be stirred with a stick to rinse. The white clothes were boiled and hung on the clothesline, while the towels and work clothes were thrown across the fence. There's that beautiful quilt. Mama did the scrubbing, and the girls helped with the rest of the tasks. Dori loved to listen to Mama as she sang while she worked. The tunes varied from lively folk songs to hymns. Some of her favorites were Soldier's Boy, Little Maggie, and Unclouded Day. Dori's fingers ached from the cool fall air contrasting with the steamy hot clothes, but by mid-afternoon, the washing was over. The girls had worked feverishly all day, and Dori and her sister had a little time to play before supper. Without delay, they transformed the outhouse to a cute little playhouse. They spread a quilt and added pillows and dolls. There were times they hosted fancy tea parties in their playhouse. Dori knew Mama would take time out of her special day to share at least one cup of tea. And there's that crazy quilt. It was getting close to supper time, and Dori was getting very excited. She knew Mama would fix her favorite meal on her birthday. Her mouth watered as she thought of fried tenderloin, potatoes fried with onions, and hot cornbread. Soon Mama rang the old cowboy bell that hung by the kitchen and notified the family that it was time to eat. "Do you think you'll get a gift today?" Ruth asked Dori as they were washing their hands in the wash tub. "I don't know, but I've been thinking about it all day," Dori replied. "What do you think you'll get? Maybe a doll or a new dress?" "I hope it's not a pair of high-heeled shoes," Ruth teased. The girls laughed at the thought of Becky, who once received a pair of high-heeled shoes. Becky loved the shoes and insisted on wearing them to Sunday school, even though the family walked 2 miles to church. Becky's feet ached for days after that grueling walk, and that is a true part of the story. That really did happen to my grandma. As soon as supper was over, Papa rose from the table and told Dori to close her eyes. Ruth closed her eyes too, for she was just as eager. Papa placed a medium-sized wooden box in front of her. Excitement filled the air as she opened her eyes and saw the gift. She gently ran her hand over the lid of the box. The box had musical notes carved on the lid, with Dori's name right in the center. She knew Papa had made this in his workshop. Was this why he was spending so much time in the shop lately? She felt this was a special gift, and she savored every moment of this special occasion. And I think this is a beautiful picture right here. I almost chose this picture as the cover. It's so gorgeous. When she could stand it no more, she delicately unhooked the latch and opened the box. Resting inside was the most magnificent dulcimer Dori had ever seen. It was made of dark-stained wood that glistened with a glossy coat. There were 2 roses engraved on it and 4 strings wound tightly at the neck. She closed her eyes and held the dulcimer as tightly as she could as she whispered a prayer of thanks. This was the greatest gift she had ever seen. She sat frozen in her chair, afraid to move, for fear of waking up and discovering this was just a dream. Her fears vanished as she gently touched each string. Her small hand fit comfortably around the neck as she lifted the gift and held it close to her. The quiet hush of the moment was broken as Dori strummed a chord. The family cheered at that joyful sound, and each of her many siblings started requesting songs for her to play. She already knew how to play 3 chords, which enabled her to play many simple tunes. She had watched her older brothers, Cecil and Buddy, play many times, and they had patiently taken the time to teach her a few chords. It was because of this interest that Papa decided to make the gift. They were a musical family, and they tried to nurture the talent of each child. Papa smiled as he looked at Dori, for he knew that part of the gift could not be held in her hands. The love of music had been silently given to her as it had been given to him and to his parents by God, a musical heritage that extends to each generation. Once again, Dori sat in front of the stove, except this time she was not warming her hands, but the heart of her family as she played her dulcimer, and they all sang together in sweet harmony. There's a land that is fairer than day, and by faith we can see it afar. For the Father waits over the way to prepare us a dwelling place there in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore in the sweet by and by. We shall meet on that beautiful shore. This was the happiest day of Dori's childhood and her most memorable birthday. She would continue to play and sing for her family, neighbors, and friends on many occasions. Her beautiful voice would echo through their tiny country church for years, and blessing many people at Sunday services, weddings, and special occasions. Dori's gift would fill the hills, hollows, and hearts of her people for many, many years. Again, I want to thank everyone for tuning in and joining us on this special day as I shared Dori's gift. I thank you for the orders that have already come in, and for everyone that has joined us. I see Kimberly has ordered a book too. Thank you, guys. Remember, the first 3 people will get this dulcimer wooden puzzle, and everyone who orders the book will get the coloring book for free. So thank you again, and thank you, Kathy, for putting this all together and helping me through this. And God bless you guys. Bye-bye.